In May of 2022, The Cycle Frontier was the most wishlisted free-to-play game on Steam. After a few years building to its current version, and after 2 very successful open betas with multiple big streamers showing off the game was officially released on June 8th of 2022. A little more than a year later, Jaeger Development announced the game was not financially viable and would be sunsetting. What happened in a calendar year that took down the most promising-looking extraction shooter to actually get launched? Let's take a look at The Cycle Frontier. A little credentials on this one. I played this game from the beginning of closed betas, and I loved the experience. I even created a little tip video on playing and was invited to be in the partner program. In their launch week, all of us Cycle partners had a day with exclusive Twitch drops, so I played it for 24 hours in front of a couple thousand people. It was a good time, and I do genuinely like this game. Combined with the closed beta, I have a couple hundred hours into this. That being said, that's not a whole lot for this style of game. In fact, while we were doing the podcast covering the cycle, the last Say in Prince rated our stream, and it turns out he probably holds the record with 5,000 hours. First, who did this? Jaeger Development is a German developer started up in 1999. Their first game, Jaeger, was a 2003 Xbox-era combat flight simulator. 9 years later, in 2012, they released Spec Ops: The Line, published by 2K, a highly polished modern shooter that highlighted a soldier's internal struggle in a Middle East setting. It was a commercial failure, but it was well received by some, especially the narrative and its story that definitely makes an impact. It's a game that I reference and recommend regularly, and completely caught me off guard that they had done this game until I was researching it for GGN. Jaeger would go on to create another combat simulator called Dreadnought, which was a PS4 release in 2017 and later Windows. This game has also been sunset, wrapping up just after the Cycle announced their shutdown. Getting into the development of the Cycle, this is where it gets a bit messy. Wikipedia at the time of writing this is wrong. Jaeger's next project was a game called The Cycle, with no subtitles. We'll call this Cycle version 1 to be clear. They marketed this as not a battle royale. It has mini-maps and this cute trailer that evokes feelings of Borderlands, where they call it a free-to-play, player versus environment versus player, first-person competitive quest shooter. According to their archived site, they were prototyping it in 2017. By July 2018, they were starting alpha testing. It was 20-player matches, should last about 20 minutes, and was free on the Epic Game Store. In August of 2018, the Cycle was doing regular alpha tests, then closed betas in spring of 2019. By August, they said more than 250,000 users had tried it. They had been doing typical early access wipes and said they were doing their final wipe, and the dev updates throughout all their testing report typical balancing, weapon, vehicle additions, and revamping map elements. The Cycle Frontier players may recognize some of these assets that they were working on. At this point, they're selling cosmetics and chugging along. In March 2020, they were into Season 2 of the Cycle. In July 2020, they're teasing Season 3 titled Storm Chasers. I have heard that the Cycle Storm Chasers became such a different game at this point that some players refer to this as V2 of the game. Reading through their dev notes and patches, it's clear they want to keep building this RPG aspect of their shooter. They're including a personal space and upgrades for it. They stay pretty regular with updates to this until August of 2021, when they announce a rework over a series of roundtables. They discuss building and testing a higher stress extraction shooter. By October 2021, they have shut down the Cycle and are focused on relaunching as the Cycle Frontier. By early 2022, the branding is looking like the Cycle Frontier that we now know. They've been doing alpha testing, and then they had 2 closed beta tests available on Steam that were very successful. Lots of exposure for these. It's important here to take in the landscape of extraction shooters, the Cycle Frontier's competitors. It's a fairly new but quickly growing genre. Extraction shooters, or looter shooters, are maybe the next logical step after battle royales, amping up the stress and risk. And in case you don't know, the formula for an extraction shooter is that you have a safe hub where you keep all your gear and loot. You put some of it on and you go into a raid. You can go in with very minimal gear or armed to the teeth. You drop into a hostile environment where you may run into other players or AI while you try to loot as much as possible and get out alive. If you die down there, you lose everything you have on you. Success means filling your safe space with better and better loot and unlocking things such as better vendor equipment or cosmetics. At the time of writing this, there are a lot of upcoming extraction shooters, but most people look to one game as the standard. It's hard to talk about the genre without mentioning Escape from Tarkov, the realistic milsim that's absurdly complex with an extremely high learning curve. The game regularly has 250,000 viewers for each of its wipes or seasons, and consistently has 20,000 viewers. However, if there's one thing that most Tarkov players will say about it is that they hate it. The community gets excited for a polished game in this genre, and the idea of a sci-fi Tarkov got a lot of people excited. But the Cycle Frontier wasn't just excitement of being an alternative, it was well received by players and streamers in its closed betas.
A little bit, yeah. I'm a little excited. You have to repair your armor and stuff. Like, they did Tarkov, but in
Hey,
space.
devs, do you watch our streams? I just want to ask. I just, you don't have to lie. Just be honest.
The game got an official launch, starting with the preseason and regular season starting shortly after on June 8th, 2022. Let's talk about their seasons. It's a standard practice that if a game is in early access or closed beta, that if there's some RPG element and it's going to have an online competitive aspect, there will probably be a reset between each test. The game hasn't officially launched, right? This is most commonly seen again in Tarkov, which is still technically in beta. Resets have become, by accident or not, a feature, not a bug. Each wipe is an opportunity to start fresh from the ground up. Everyone's on a level playing field. Whether you're just starting or it's been a while since you've jumped in, the beginning of wipe is a perfect time to get back into it, and it's a great time for developers to introduce new elements. I think the Cycle Frontier very wisely brought this into their strategy with seasons. Obviously, each closed beta, which ran for a couple weeks, was a contained season that was wiped. The player base was given the expectation that it would be 3 to 4 months of each season, with a wipe happening on each one. So the game officially launches in June of 2022 to good numbers. The game was heavily pushed on Epic Game Store. I'm looking at Steam metrics here, but it had 40,000 concurrent players, which in 2023 is what games like Dead by Daylight or DayZ or The Sims pull daily. It wasn't a widely reviewed game, being free to play, only launching on PC, and not having a traditional launch, but reviewers like PC Games praised its foundation and playstyle, but noted there was not enough substance and a repetitive game loop. On the user side, many users, including myself, loved the casual sci-fi Tarkov feel of the game. It was a high-tension extraction shooter that you could play without pulling up a companion wiki to tell you what ammo, what gun took, or what 12 attachments you need to put on your weapon. You could sneak around to try and stuff your bag full and feel good about the progression you were making. I personally love the extraction shooter genre and its potential for memorable encounters and stories of going zero to hero. I think everyone should try out a game like this, be it Hunt Showdown, which is an extraction shooter with very little focus on looting, or even DMZ, which is a very arcadey approach to the genre. And keep your eyes out for some upcoming ones. But for the Cycle Frontier, the gameplay basics were there and solid. A handful of weapons to use in different tiers, tiered armor, several hundred loot items, and it started with 2 maps. A large progression tree for your hub upgrades. Comparing it to others of the genre, it was the non-miserable aesthetic, light version of Tarkov, a game that's been hugely successful, so this seemed to be in a good place. And given the rapid development of going from version 1 of the cycle to this full-feeling extraction shooter, hopes were high. There was also, whether given by the devs or just rumors, the expectation that it would be launching on console and be much more accessible to a wider audience. A few unique things that the game had going for it that I'd like to point out. The world lore. The reasoning for there being a safe hub and a dangerous place to go is a bit tricky, I think. Tarkov just calls it a hideout, and when you go into a raid, you simply appear on a map and disappear from the map at extraction points. DMZ similarly sends you on a mission in the same maps over and over again, and you take a helicopter out. But it's the same Middle East world being constantly repopulated by magic. The cycle handles this by having your hub on a space station above the planet, which is filled with prospectors who drop down onto the planet to scavenge until you call in a pickup ship to go back. Pretty seamless. Yes, when you die, you're preserved in foam and your body is brought back to the hub to defoam. Although the graffiti on the wall says otherwise, there's no conceit of a magical ring of damage moving in to force the gameplay mechanic. This lore explanation for me works better than most games handle it. The creature PvP. I like the beasties. Having the world populated with manageable monsters that are more of a pest than a threat is nice. Most games that are PvE are humanoid guys with guns, right? This is at least trying something new. The server structure. In every extraction shooter I'm aware of, you queue up for a map, sometimes wait minutes to get into the game, and then everyone starts at the same time, as if it's a battle royale. The Cycle Frontier used a persistent server that only resets every 6 hours. So hypothetically, if you dropped in at the beginning of a server, you could hang out there collecting loot for 6 hours. You wouldn't be able to hold it all, but you could. This would mean that as you're on the planet running around, you would see a regular stream of both drop pods coming in and extraction ships leaving. Which sounds like you might get ambushed by people when you drop in. At the beginning there were some issues with spacing these out correctly, but I think they worked it out, and I was happy with it. Plus, the wait times in the cycle were shockingly short. As soon as you readied up, you deploy almost instantaneously. The storms. The title refers to the storms in this game. Every 20 minutes or so, a storm is announced to be on the way. It's not a cheesy closing circle that will damage you, it's an actual storm. The world goes very dark, rainy and windy, and lightning strikes start coming down. Most players will extract before the storm hits. Some will go into an area like a building that's safe to loot in the darkness while they wait it out. This creates a nice flow to the game where the server thins out as the storm gets closer and then gets more populated right after the storm as the drop pods come in. And finally, the server events. I can't cover them all, but for example, you may look across the sky and see a string of meteors hitting the planet, which will leave valuable minerals you can mine. Of course, other players will have seen the meteors coming as well, which creates riskier area for everyone to visit. There are also several endgame events like laser drills that you can call in, which is a massive building-sized drill that you'll need to protect for a while until it finishes. There's a dungeon, there's an in-raid forge you can use, there's some good in-lore events that gave the game some depth, I think. And all of these are good things, but they don't explain what happens, so despite most initial reviews being positive, it was hard to talk about the game in the first few weeks without acknowledging the elephant in the room. Sometimes the elephant could see wireframes, it would be invisible. Cheaters. More than half the negative reviews in the first month mention cheaters. In my personal experience, I can't say I encountered them that often, but this game isn't like Call of Duty where if you run into a cheater, you sigh and then you just join another lobby.
He just killed me with a normal pistol.
You've brought in gear that you fought hard for. You've spent 15 minutes sneaking around with a backpack full of stuff that's going to complete 4 quests. And then you get nicked from someone floating through the sky with an end-game gun. And then when you check on the Discord, everyone else is mentioning this user by name as well, and others that are currently cheating.
Maybe you want to throw up. Because the cheaters I just got killed by have been cheating on the same account for more than 1 week now. So if cheaters are getting away with cheating for more than 1 week, the game's dead. Like, that's it. It's not gonna happen.
Yeah, especially a free-to-play game.
It's not gonna happen.
Like, cause then they're finally gonna get banned, and they're literally just gonna make a new account.
And this didn't just happen on the full game release. This happened in closed beta 2 to many, including me. Jaeger was up front with their desire to combat cheaters and even called Season 3 the War on Cheats. Over the year, they took a many-pronged approach to combating them, but the initial problem seemed to poison the opinion of the game from the beginning. It's great when a streamer is playing your game to 20,000 people, but if they're being abused by an invisible hacker, it's better they weren't streaming it at all. Every game is susceptible to cheaters, but a game with RPG-like elements where cheating will get you ahead of not just one game, but future games is a bigger target. And of course, it's against terms of service to sell an account or items, but it is done. EFT notoriously has a hacker problem. People pay to have Sherpas guide them around and help them level up, or sell entire accounts because of the gear and character unlocks. If EFT still has this issue after years, and getting caught will have your $40 game invalidated, what hope does a company who's newer at this and offering a free-to-play game have? I remember in the early days of this game seeing the cheater reports happening in their Discord, and the community managers were doing their best, but this game was hugely popular and there was no way to keep up with the stream of reported hackers. Even if they had banned everyone reported, the damage was already done by the time you were reporting it. Your gear was gone. I think I, like many others, were discouraged by this and caused us to put it down. I think we assumed they would work on it, we'd check in again during the next season when they had things handled. And this isn't to imply that developers weren't interested, it just seems that whatever steps they were taking weren't enough. By Season 3 it was in a much better spot, but this was greatly helped by the decline in the popularity, splitting the servers into trusted and untrusted groupings. They were dedicating resources to fixing it. But that takes me to my second point, their development speed. They took great bounds between version 1 of the cycle and the cycle frontier, yet looking at the cycle frontier's closed beta and where we are now in Season 3, it's not expanded enough. There are a couple new maps and some good changes, expansions to the weapons, but for a game that you want people to be so invested in that you buy premium currency, it didn't seem to be adding enough new content. To be fair, it doesn't help that some of your player base has expectations coming from Tarkov. People call the Cycle Frontier casual Tarkov, but then complain when it doesn't have the depth of Tarkov. That's what makes it casual, and many Tarkov players play the game as if it's their job. For some people it is. But applying that hyper-competitive approach to this game, you'll see them quickly reaching the end of the game and calling it boring. Of course there's no end to a PvP, but running around in endgame gear in this game doesn't have the same hook as some competitors that were coming out. So again, people figured, well, put it down for now and try it again later. I played this game a lot in closed beta and Season 1, and sporadically throughout, and then took a hard look at it again as things were winding down in Season 3. The game is now, a year after launch, feels like probably where it should have been in Season 1, maybe Season 2. With as many people interested in it as there were, it needed to grow fast to hold people's interest, but it didn't seem to happen. Without getting into NDA territory, which I assume still applies, the sentiment seemed to be that the development team struggled to implement changes because this was version 3 of a very different game. Yes, when creating this, they were able to reuse a lot of assets to get this extraction shooter in a polished place quicker, maybe in the same way that when Battle Royales took off, the Fortnite team used an existing game to create the most popular Battle Royale, but Jaeger seemed to struggle with pushing this game past the state of its launch due to old coding. To me at least, it felt like they spent a lot of their development time working on the balancing and feedback from players who played this game like it was Tarkov. But this was supposed to be casual Tarkov, and there's an interesting point to be had there about a casual Tarkov. Is that an oxymoron? Isn't Tarkov by definition incredibly in-depth and realistic? What happens if you make something in-depth and realistic casual? Is there still something there? It just feels like Jaeger fell victim to serving two audiences, the sweats and the casuals. And the sweats who were no-lifing this game were being very vocal about their feedback. The rest of the complaints about the game were things that I would call healthy, issues with solo and grouping or skill matchmaking, conversations about time to kill, weapon balancing, lag disconnection issues, which I think they did a good job addressing. Let's jump back to the timeline of this game. The game launched in June 2022. 3 months later, right as expected, Season 2 dropped. Wipe had some new added content. As they're leading up to the announcement of Season 3, there began an internal discussion about the changes coming. What was settled on, despite many people's disagreement, was that with Season 3 there would be no more wipes. That would be the last one. Unless you wanted to reset, the manual reset would provide rewards. It would be like retiring your character, but no one had to reset anymore. I think that many of us, this was a clear red flag that something was very wrong and they were desperate and needed to shake things up. Many people disagreed with this choice, but to be fair to them, Season 3 had the biggest player count since launch at 10,000 concurrent players. But without a clear marker in the game development to bring players back, the player count over 3 months slowly trickled down to about 2,000 active users on Steam when they announced sunsetting. To be clear, 2,000 concurrent players isn't nothing. At the time of writing this, Fall Guys in 2023 has 2,000 players. Should they be shut down? Guild Wars 2 has just over 2,000. Of course, in the end, it's not the player count alone that made this decision. It was revenue. And as they said in their announcement message, it had not been and was not financially viable. It's worth noting that Chinese multinational conglomerate and largest video game holding company Tencent invested in Jaeger in 2020, then became majority shareholder in 2021. So we've mentioned it was free to play, but what was their actual revenue model for this game? Well, it's confusing. It's all about the premium currency, Aurum. Okay, so what can you spend it on? Main thing, the Battle Pass. They planned each season to have one. This costs $10 worth of Aurum. As you progress along the Battle Pass, by just playing, it'll get you cosmetics and some supply crates full of goodies. Without paying, you can also get some free stuff along the Battle Pass progression. But that's the marker of progress for this season, like your level. And you can spend more Aurum to skip ahead in the Battle Pass. Second, skipping timers. In your hideout, you do research to upgrade things like expand your loot box or your safe pocket, and lots of other things for your hideout. If you get the right items to upgrade it, you have to wait minutes, hours, or sometimes days, depending on how far along you are, while you can use the Aurum to skip the timer part. You can also spend Aurum on cosmetics. There's a daily cycling store. If you see something you like, you gotta get it now. Drop pod skins, banners, weapon skins, trinkets, etc. And finally, insurance. You can spend Aurum on making sure you get your gear back if you lose it in the raid, either money reimbursement or the item itself. And the reason that none of these seem to work, well, the Battle Pass was just cosmetics and loot boxes with gear in them. It was not necessary by any means. The timer skip, it's not like it skipped the need for the ingredient itself. You still need 3 of these hard-to-find items to even start the upgrade. By the time you found them, your previous upgrade was usually complete. No skip needed. The cosmetics. Sure, they're cosmetic. Maybe you're the type of person to spend money on that. But it is a first-person game. You don't get to enjoy the cosmetics that much. And I like the cosmetics of this game. I think they did a good job on them, but I never felt there was something I really wanted. The insurance. I think I barely used it. It's a bit confusing to new players, and non-casual players have enough gear they don't really care that much. And one more reason the premium currency sales may have been affected, in your hideout, one of the pieces of equipment that you're working on upgrading is an Aurum generator. In theory, great idea, encourages people to play the game. There's this incentive of I'm generating premium currency. But if your gambit works and people play your game enough and upgrade it enough, it's giving them the premium currency. Granted, not a lot and not very quickly, but I figured with a couple upgrades, you'll get enough for a battle pass within much less time than you needed it. And once you do buy that battle pass, some of the supply boxes in the battle pass have Aurum in them, and you'll end up going into the next season with enough to buy another battle pass, which will also have boxes of Aurum. It seems the solution to all this would be to increase the cost of things, right? Well, a $10 battle pass feels about right, but what about the cosmetic? Well, they did. Around Season 2, the DLC store looked like packages that were $50, $100, another $100, and $125. Looking at the in-game store for cosmetics, some outfits would translate to about $30 in real-world money just for a full outfit. I remember seeing their DLC pricing and store costs and feeling bewildered, but then I felt like, if someone has more money than they know what to do with, sure, Jaeger, get that bag. They obviously thought plenty about monetization as well. It just seems they believed that the need for Aurum, which you would spend on skipping timers, new cosmetics, and insurance tokens would be so great that it would fund the game. And you could also buy the Aurum in packs alone. It just wasn't very enticing to do so. In fact, when I was thinking about this game's revenue model, I had a crisis of faith realizing I don't think I ever spent any money on this game. So with hardcore players generating some of their own premium currency and new players getting the full experience without paying any money, where are they making money? Even if players were excited for a casual Tarkov, there just wasn't any incentive, aside from the kindness of your own heart, to give Jaeger money. In fact, as I was looking back at the forums, people were hoping this was enough money for them and saying they would rather pay full price if it helped combat cheaters in game development. And with any game with microtransactions, it's worth mentioning, was it pay to win? I think they towed the line a bit. With each season, you could use the premium currency to buy the battle pass and pay your way all the way through it, and start the season with far better gear than a completely free player. But all this gear is temporary, and if you're not good at the game, you're going to lose it pretty quickly. The Cycle Frontier had a lot of potential in an uncrowded but desirable space, but from the get-go it was poisoned by cheaters, which was a reputation it held until the end. Its player count was not that low, but it was divided quite a bit by attempts to combat cheaters and the addition of maps to appease endgame players. Its development was bogged down by the fact that it was made out of the bones of previous games. With the game not being financially viable and seemingly no change of that direction in the horizon, Jaeger announced the sunsetting of this game. So what started off as one of the most promising extraction shooters is closed down because of their revenue model and a shrinking player base, leaving a void in the genre. Fortunately, there are some exciting upcoming games, and interestingly, Jaeger hasn't closed down. It doesn't look like they'll make a version 4 of this game, but I am interested to see where they go next. And that's all I've got for the Cycle Frontier. We had fun.